It's not much trumpeted about, but in 2002, with the death of the late Queen Elizabeth II and the accession of Charles III, Great Britain had a change of royal dynasty. The last time that happened was in 1901, when with the death of Queen Victoria and the accession of Edward VII, the Royal House of Hanover ended and gave way to the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. Of course, in July of 1917, during the First World War, a royal proclamation by George V rebranded the German House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha as the acceptably English House of Windsor. Now, Elizabeth II was keen that her descendants would keep the dynastic name the House of Windsor too, and in her accession declaration on the 9th of April 1952, she declared that she and, more unusually, her descendants would continue to be styled the House of Windsor. In 1960, Elizabeth II made a slight change to this. Through an order of the Privy Council, she declared that her descendants, who enjoyed the style of Royal Highness and the title of Prince and Princess, would be of the House of Windsor, but that all others of her male line descendants would bear the name Mountbatten Windsor to acknowledge their descent from Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Philip had assumed the surname Mountbatten, which is an anglicisation of his mother's maiden name Battenberg, in March of 1947, ahead of his engagement to Princess Elizabeth. Elizabeth II's wishes, as expressed in this declaration in Council in 1960, are in no way legislative or legally binding on any of her descendants. If he so wished, Charles III could change the name of his royal house, although I doubt he will. Charles has several possible options open to him. The most obvious would be to use the adopted family name of his father, Mountbatten, or even Mountbatten Windsor. Anyway, I thought it would be a bit of fun to look back as far as we can at the direct male line ancestry of King Charles III, which we can trace back through 24 generations to the late 11th century, as that might give us a clue as to what alternative dynastic names there might be for the British royal house. The earliest certain direct male line ancestor of Charles III is Egelmar I, who is the king's 24 times great-grandfather. He lived in the late 11th and early 12th century and was granted the title of Count of Oldenburg and was a local lord, a feudal vassal of the Duke of Saxony, which was then part of the Holy Roman Empire. Oldenburg, with its North Sea coast, is in the northernmost part of Lower Saxony in modern-day Germany. We know nothing of Egelmar's parentage, but we can assume he was of noble degree. It was claimed that he was the descendant of the semi-mythical Widukind, an 8th century Saxon leader who was an opponent to the imperial pretensions of the Frankish Emperor Charlemagne. Egelmar and his wife Richenza created a long-lasting dynasty that was called the House of Oldenburg. Their son, Egelmar II, ruled Oldenburg from around 1108 to 1142, and he is the 23 times great-grandfather of Charles III. He was succeeded in turn by his son Christian I, known to many as the Quarrelsome, who reigned from 1143 to 1167 and is the 22 times great-grandfather of Charles III. His successor was his son Maurice I, who would rule until 1211 and is the 21 times great-grandfather of Charles III. In 1189, during Maurice's rule, the Duchy of Saxony was partitioned by the Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa, and the Counts of Oldenburg went from being vassals of the Saxon Duchy to being princes of the Holy Roman Empire in their own right. Maurice was succeeded by his two sons, who ruled jointly, Christian II and Otto I. Christian is the 20 times great-grandfather of Charles III. When Christian died in 1233, his brother Otto carried on ruling with Christian's son John I, who is the 19 times great-grandfather of Charles III. The inheritance then passes to John's son Christian III, who died in 1285 and is the 18 times great-grandfather of Charles III. Christian was succeeded in turn by his son John II. He is the 17 times great-grandfather of King Charles III. John II was succeeded by 3 of his sons consecutively, Count Christian IV from 1302 to 1323, who ruled jointly from 1305 with his brother John III. John III appears to have ruled for a time with his son John IV, but he died before his father, and so the inheritance went to John III's brother, Conrad I, who would rule between 1344 to 1347, and he is the 16 times great-grandfather of Charles III. Conrad I was succeeded in 1347 by his son Conrad II, who from 1368 to 1399 ruled jointly with his brother Christian V, who is the 15 times great-grandfather of Charles III. By this time, the Oldenburg dynasty are gradually growing in wealth and prestige. Dietrich I, or Theodoric of Oldenburg as he is sometimes known, the son of Christian V, became head of the Oldenburg family in 1403 when he was 5. He is the 14 times great-grandfather of King Charles III. It is during Dietrich's rule that the fortunes of the Oldenburg family are transformed. They go from being a minor noble or princely family within the Holy Roman Empire to a family of royal status, and this was accomplished through judicious marriage. Dietrich married twice. First, he married his cousin Countess Adelheid of Oldenburg-Delmenhorst, a member of a cadet branch of his own family, and this marriage united what had become a somewhat fragmented county under Dietrich's rule. After the death of Adelheid, Dietrich then married a second time to Hedwig of Holstein. She was a rich widow, having been married to Prince Balthasar of Mecklenburg, but more importantly, she was of royal descent. Her brother was the ruling Duke Adolf VIII of Schleswig and Holstein, and her father Duke Gerhard VI of Schleswig and Holstein. She was the 3 times great-granddaughter of King Erik V of Denmark. There was in this period a succession crisis in Denmark. From 1397 until 1412, the crowns of Denmark, Norway and Sweden were held in personal union by Margaret I. She was the daughter of Valdemar IV and the widow of Håkon VI of Norway and Sweden. There was a child of the marriage between Margaret and Håkon, Olaf II. He was King of Denmark from 1376 with his mother as regent, and in 1380 succeeded too to the thrones of Norway and Sweden on the death of his father. However, he died aged 17 in 1387, and there was no obvious heir. In 1389, Margaret declared that her great-nephew, the 6 or 7-year-old Boguslav, Duke of Pomerania, would be her heir. He was duly proclaimed King of the 3 realms as King Erik, and was crowned at Kalmar in 1397, and ruled jointly with Margaret until her death in 1412. He was not a good king, and in 1439 he was deposed as King of Denmark and Sweden, and then in 1442 as King of Norway. His nephew, Christopher of Bavaria, succeeded him as king of all 3 nations, but he died without heirs, aged 31, in 1448. Duke Adolf VIII of Schleswig and Holstein was offered the throne of Denmark as the strongest claimant, but he declined, and then the throne was offered to the son of his sister Hedwig and her husband Dietrich of Oldenburg, Count Christian of Oldenburg. When Christian became King of Denmark, his younger brother Gerhard would become the new Count of Oldenburg. King Christian I of Denmark is the 13 times great-grandfather of King Charles III. Christian was succeeded on the throne of Denmark by his son John I, who died in 1513, and he then by his son Christian II. The duchies of Schleswig and Holstein had by this point merged with the Danish crown. Christian II was deposed as King of Denmark and Norway in 1523, and the throne was offered to his uncle, the younger son of Christian I, Frederick I, the 12 times great-grandfather of Charles III, and he was succeeded in 1534 by his son Christian III, the 11 times great-grandfather of Charles III. The 10 times great-grandfather of Charles III is Christian III's 3rd son, John, or Hans of Denmark, who founded a new noble dynasty. Born in 1545, he inherited from his father the right to be the hereditary Duke of Schleswig and Holstein, and he was given lands at Sonderburg and Glücksburg. He made his principal seat the castle at Sonderburg, and thus he became known as the Duke of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg. When Duke John died in 1622, his duchy was divided among his sons, with the majority going to his eldest son, Alexander, Duke of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg, who is the 9 times great-grandfather of Charles III. Charles III's 8 times great-grandfather is Duke Alexander's 5th son, Duke August Philip, who was born in 1612. He had little to inherit, as what there was went to his elder brothers. At the age of 21, Duke August Philip emigrated from Denmark to Germany, where he served as an army officer in various German princely armies. In 1646, he profited sufficiently to buy himself a little estate called House Beck within the Margraviate of Brandenburg, and he would then style himself the Duke of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Beck. Charles III's 7 times great-grandfather is August Philip's younger son, Frederick Louis, Duke of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Beck, who was born in 1653. As a younger son, he didn't inherit Beck, but made a career for himself as his father had done as a soldier. He served in the Prussian army, rising to be a field marshal and the commander-general of the Prussian army. He died in 1728 in Prussia. It is from Frederick Louis's 5th and youngest son, Peter August. He is Charles III's 6 times great-grandfather. Peter August, like his father, was a landless duke, and he lived on his wits. He made a future for himself in the army, but in this case in the Russian Imperial Army, rising to the rank of field marshal. He served as the governor of Tallinn and the governor of Estonia, then both part of the Russian Empire. He died and was buried in Tallinn in 1775. Charles III's 5 times great-grandfather is Peter August's son, Karl Anton August. He too was a career soldier, but died aged 32 at the Battle of Kundersdorf, fighting in the Prussian army. His son, Friedrich Karl Ludwig, Duke of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Beck, the 4 times great-grandfather of Charles III, would likewise serve in the Prussian army, and when he retired in 1797, he was a lieutenant general. He purchased a small estate and manor house, Wellingsbüttel Manor, on the edge of Hamburg, and died there in 1816. The Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Beck family's fortunes changed radically in the next few generations. Friedrich Karl's only son, Friedrich Wilhelm, born in 1785, is the 3 times great-grandfather of Charles III. Friedrich Wilhelm joined the Danish army, and in 1810 he married Princess Louise Caroline of Hesse-Kassel, whose sister Marie was queen consort to Friedrich's distant relative, King Frederick VI of Denmark. In 1816, Friedrich would become Duke of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Beck, but in 1825 his brother-in-law the King would bestow on him Glücksburg Castle and the vast estates that went with it. Glücksburg was once, of course, a royal castle and had belonged to his ancestor John of Denmark. Friedrich then became Duke of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glücksburg. He died in 1831 and was succeeded in his duchy by his first son Karl, who died in 1878, and then by his second son Friedrich. Friedrich Wilhelm and Louise of Hesse-Kassel would have 10 children, and their 4th son was Duke Christian, who was born in 1818, and he is the 2 times great-grandfather of King Charles III. In the 1840s, there was a developing succession crisis once again for the Danish crown. The elder line of the House of Oldenburg, which had been on the throne since Christian I, was on the verge of extinction. There were only 2 male members of that family left, and they had no legitimate children. The House of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glücksburg were, as we have seen, a cadet branch, a junior branch of that Oldenburg family. There were a number of cadet branches of the Oldenburgs, and numerous claimants. Christian's elder brothers had a stronger claim than he. However, Christian was seemingly the favoured candidate, not only in Denmark, but among other powerful European nations, including the United Kingdom, France, Russia, Prussia and Austria. So in 1853, Duke Christian was declared the heir presumptive to the throne after Frederick VII's childless and elderly uncle Frederick Ferdinand, hereditary Prince of Denmark. Christian was granted the title as hereditary Prince of Denmark, and he succeeded to the throne in November of 1863 as King Christian IX, the second constitutional monarch of Denmark. Christian IX and Frederick VII's common ancestor was King Christian III of Denmark, way back in the 16th century. Shortly before Christian IX ascended the Danish throne in 1863, his second son, George, then aged 17, was elected as King George I of the Hellenes, the King of Greece, by the Greek National Assembly. King George of the Hellenes is the great-grandfather of King Charles III. When he was elected as king, Greece had been independent for about 40 years after throwing off centuries of Ottoman Turkish rule. It became a kingdom in 1832 with Otto, the second son of King Ludwig I of Bavaria, as its king. Otto was overthrown in a coup in 1862, with George being elected king in 1863. King George I of the Hellenes would be assassinated in 1913. King George I's fourth son was Prince Andrew, who was both Prince of Greece and of Denmark. He was born in 1882, and he is the grandfather of King Charles III. And his only son was Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the king's father. Now, it's just a bit of fun, this sort of bonkers genealogical exercise, I know, but I hope it demonstrates that Charles III would have a choice of names of royal house if he decided to change it from the House of Windsor. If he decided against his father's adopted surname of Mountbatten, it would be quite correct for him to name his royal house the House of Glücksburg, in line with the Danish and Greek royal families, shorthand, of course, for the House of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg Glücksburg. Alternatively, as the House of Glücksburg is just a cadet branch of the House of Oldenburg, that would be an equally valid choice too, given that Charles III is in the direct male line of that ancient noble house. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this channel, you're bound to enjoy my magazine, The Antiquary. Published every month, it is a labour of love for me, and in it I explore some of the more obscure aspects of our shared history, all beautifully illustrated in full colour. It ships across the world, is offered in print and digital format, and readers give it 5 stars on Google. If you love your history like me, particularly the history of objects, buildings, people and places, why not consider subscribing? Subscribing helps support my work and the channel too. There's a link above and in the video description that takes you to the magazine website.